Yeah, we're going to take a deeper dive into 14th century mystic Meister Eckhart and what he has to say for us in the 21st century. Eckhart was had a keen sense back in the 14th century that they were on a kind of downward spiral in terms of the failure of institutions, his own church. There was wars, Hundred Years' Wars came during that time, and the Black Plague. It was, it was a dark time, and so he was was preaching to it, and it was preaching a kind of theology that was not preached before that, at least in that middle part of Europe, the German Rhineland and the Low Countries, and also hasn't been preached much since because he was so much of a breakthrough kind of a theologian that they excommunicated him and then sealed all of his writings for over 600 years. But the Tibetans believe that when the time is right, you find these buried treasures. They call them terma. And I think the time is right for Eckhart's view. Today we'll be looking at path one. Now, if you made the Dancing with Spirit, we talked about this kind of fourfold path, kind of spiral fourfold path that he talks about that gives you some sense of how to move through whatever comes up. But it's a kind of it's a different kind of path because Eckhart himself called it a wayless way. He was making up words in German all the time. There is no word for wayless way in German, and actually it gets underlined on my computer because they say that's not a word. Well, he made it up in German, and he said it's a wayless way. What he meant was it's not going to tell. This way won't tell you where you're going. Won't tell you where the next step is, and it won't tell you what is around, but it will tell you how. It will tell you how to move through it, and the how is the important thing. Opening poem that is it's a kind of it's a rendering from several of his sermons into one poem, and it's called Setting Forth Together. So I want to read that to begin with, just to give you a sense of the fact of how this works, and we're sort of walking this together and what's that's like. So when you set forth together on a wayless way path, what is it like? And this is a rendering of Eckhart. Let's be clear about one thing. Let's be clear about one thing. You are your own best teacher. I can only tell you what I know, but you'll need to discover it for yourself. So don't expect me to tell you what to think or how to live. I'll share with you the truth I've found, that life is full of darkness that can enlighten you in its own way. There's a thread to guide you, but to find it, you'll need to look within yourself. When you do, seek the light that shines out of the darkness and be radiant for those who long for hope to brighten their journey. Setting forth together on what you'll discover is a wayless way. Yeah, just a couple of reflections on this poem and on these words of Eckhart. Let me be clear about one thing. You are your own best teacher. Yeah, that's good teaching right there. I used to say that to 30 years of students in the classroom. I said, I'm the guy sitting up front with the desk and all that and the podium, but you're your own best teacher. Eckhart understood education. He was a preacher and a teacher. The word education comes from the Latin. Of course, he wrote in Latin and German, which was part of his breakthrough to actually preach to people in the language they could understand. But in Latin, education comes from the word educare, which means to bring forth. And he understood that. And that's actually our third path here is this actual bringing forth of what is within you. So he says, you're your own best teacher. I can tell you what I know, but you have to discover it for yourself. You have to find it. So don't expect me to tell you what to think or how to live, which he doesn't. He says, I can tell you this, that life is full of darkness that can enlighten you. I once wrote a poem that it went like, everybody wants enlightenment, but who wants endarkenment? But there is such a thing. It's getting the enlightenment out of the dark. But who wants a dark? Everyone wants enlightenment. But it can, this darkness can enlighten you in its own way. There's a thread to guide you. And those of you who know Stafford's poem, but the way it is, there's a thread you follow. So he is giving us a thread, but you have to look for it within yourself. Constantly, that's Eckhart's view, that we need to go inward. He said, when you seek the light that shines out of darkness, you can become radiant for those who long for hope to brighten their journey. It is a dark journey sometimes. And when we walk together like this, some of us have these moments of where we get in contact with our own inner light. And so we can light the way for the rest of the community or for whoever we work with or our family or whatever. That's something we can do. It's not just for ourselves. It's for a community. It's for the whole cosmos, the whole planet. He says you can brighten their journey by doing your own work and having your own connections with the light, the inner light. Setting forth together on this journey, what you'll discover is that it is a wayless way. In other words, Joseph Campbell said to Bill Moyers one time, he said, Bill, if you open your back door and you see a yellow brick road leading all the way to your destination, you can be sure it's not your destination. And that's a guy who spent his whole life working with the myths from all different cultures. This is a wayless way. You can't get a triptych for it, you see. So that's important to realize, even though we're going to talk about path one today, which is the first part of the path, which is befriending creation, light, and joy. We can learn some things about that will help. But and ultimately, we'll learn about the practices that really work in this part of the journey. Yeah, but you have to find it all yourself. But walking together really helps. Carl Jung starts us off here, just in terms of his idea of the wayless way. He said one time, one way to lose your soul. One way to lose your soul is to worship a God outside yourself. One way to lose your soul is to worship a God outside yourself. Carl Jung. I think that's deep. Now, part of understanding about this looking within is to understand that all theism, with various monotheism, pantheism, all theism has a God out there somewhere. So you've got the subject here and then the object there. God can become an object. Maybe you're an object to God in that view. So the subject-object thing happens in all theism, except for one. It's called panentheism. Not pantheism, but panentheism, E-N, theism. And at the same time, Eckhart was grasping that view. He said, the eye with which I see God is the eye with which God sees me. Julian of Norwich, an anchoress in a small church in the center of England, same time, 14th century. She says, we are in God, and God, whom we do not see, is in us. That's as good as you can say about pantheism, that we are in God, and God, whom we do not see, is in us. There is no subject object. It would be subject to subject if you'd say, or just not making any object. We've all made an object out of God, no matter how bad or good our training was. But Eckhart, he's asking us to try to cut a different space. So was Julian of Norwich, Hildegard of Bingen, Mechtild of Magdeburg. These are all Rhineland mystics, Hildegard and Mechtild, and they all were coming into this at that same time, in a dark time, actually. Plague, wars. Yeah, but get that. So that's why when you look inside, Eckhart's image, he was a poet, even though he wrote prose, it was that if you go to your very, very center inside, there'll be a spark of the divine. Because it's like a God seed, okay? And we'll work with that a little bit later. So in each of the four paths, it's a journey of trust and deepening trust as you go through each of these stations. And you don't just do this trip once, not one rodeo. It's a spiral path that you keep going through. We've been through it many times, not too skillfully sometimes. And maybe we got stuck, and maybe we jumped off the wheel. Okay. So what you really need to do is have a deep trust and a willingness to grow and expand. And that means, as we'll talk about next week, being willing and skillfully know how to go through the dark times, the times of great pain, grief. That's next week. But we're going to start today with befriending creation. And in this path, this part of the path, there's a lot of joy and light. It's not that way all the time, though. No, Eckhart says, based on this idea of understanding the whole thing and understanding creation, he said, if the only prayer you say in your whole life is thank you, that would suffice. If the only prayer you say in your whole life is thank you, that would suffice, according to Eckhart. Because, a deep gratitude starts to settle in to your heart as you start to understand the gift of creation. In fact, here I am, out of all the other possibilities and all that we have this creation. We have a planet that has come back and become fruitful and nourishing 2 or 3 times that we know of after huge disasters. The planet keeps coming back. The planet keeps coming back. Dandelions make it through the cement. It has a power of fertility that we got to bank on and we got to recognize. Now, in this kind of light and this understanding of light and joy and the experience of it in creation, probably one of the great modern figures who just graduated a couple years ago was Thich Nhat Hanh. Thich Nhat Hanh lives in this area. He teaches from this place. That's why he always has a smile on his face. He taught smiling practice for a whole weekend to a group. I listened to the tape. And when he did questions and answers, one question was, well, isn't it a little bit inauthentic that when we feel really crappy that we should have a smile on our lips? And Thich Nhat Hanh never jumps to an answer. He sits with it a little bit, and I imagine him smiling, and he said, well, that's why we call it practice. Just like it's practiced to be toilet trained. It's not natural. We train ourselves. That's sort of nice. So the practice of raising a little smile to your lips at all times. He only went to Zen Center in San Francisco one time where Suzuki Roshi was, and they kept trying to get him back. And Thich Nhat Hanh just wouldn't reply, or well, he'd put him off. And finally, somebody just really put it to somebody at Plum Village, who was taking all these things, and said, "Well, how come he won't come back to Zen Center?" And they said, "Well, if you want to know, really, it's because he thought you guys didn't smile enough. You were sort of grim." And so he really does teach to this part. If some of you working with Linda Rands especially, are you're really working with Thich Nhat Hanh. He's a great introduction to this stage of the journey, which comes around and around. It's the start of it. See, so to have joy, different contemplative practices for each station, by the way, and so, but this is certainly one of them. Before he had a stroke, when he could talk, but people noticed he was getting old, and they said, "Well, what do you think about the afterlife?" And Thich Nhat Hanh said, "Well, it's still now, so I'm not worried about it." And he said, "In my tradition, they talk about you could go to the Pure Land, just sort of opt out of all the darkness, and you just get off at the joy stop of the Pure Land." He said, "I might check it out, but if there aren't any lemon trees there, I'm coming back to this life." And that was really interesting. That's really interesting. He also had a statement where he said, "No mud, no lotus." And that's going to be very helpful because we're going into the mud next week. But, it's not all light. And it's a mix. It's muddy and clear at the same time. But this is like when the sun's shining. And he just loved lemon trees. He loved this incarnation. So he said, "Well, if there are no lemon trees, I'm coming back." Yeah. Now, one more thing on just this place. I think Jesus is talking about this place where he said, unfortunately, when an Aramaic speaker got run through the Greek mill and got run through the Latin mill, and then finally came in the King James mill of English, you lose something with every translation, lost in translation. When I read it, it said at one point, the rich young man was trying to ask him, trying to get in the group, and he said, "Well, be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect." That's what I read in my English version. And for me, that was a kind of improvised explosive device because, all right, yeah, be perfect as your Father in heaven was perfect. And, so that fueled this little perfectionist. But by the time I was studying Aramaic, many or decades later, Neil Douglas Klotz, who was the teacher, he said in Aramaic, because he had the Aramaic gospel, he said, my rendering would be whole as the universe is whole. Totally other view. Be whole as the universe is whole. And you got to understand, wholeness means to have both your perfection and imperfections. You include it all, you see. That's what this means. Nothing left out. For instance, if you were actually buying you think you were buying an authentic Navajo rug. They have these intricate designs of their cosmos. But if you know about this, they always have one thread that comes out of the design and goes off the edge. One little imperfection. That's how you know it's not a copy. It's an original. Because they were saying, even with this grand design, we have to include the imperfections. And that was really a kind of salvation for me, and hopefully for you. So it includes imperfections. No mud, no lotus. And this is a sense of wholeness now. And we're part of it. And there's no distinction between God and the creatures and the trees and the squirrels and the soil and the air. There's no, most indigenous people have some kind of chant that brings the earth, the air, the water, the fire, the space together. Those are the five elements for indigenous Buddhism, the Bon tradition: earth, air, water, fire, space. And you're part of that. You're part of that. John Muir, who uh, was the guy who started the Sierra Club, he used to just take a loaf of bread and a coat and he'd walk out onto glaciers, because he was so, he'd climb trees. John Muir would climb trees in the middle of thunderstorms to get closer to the action. He was so a little crazy, but it was a kind of crazy wisdom. He says everything is hitched together with everything else. If you try to pull out something specific, you'll find out it's all hitched together. And for Eckhart, he saw that vision, and he knew God was the glue. God is what was the connectivity. That's another way of looking at the divine. So this is a very bright station, and you can be there sometimes. Now it's going a little long, so I don't want to skip this though. This is about an original blessing. The whole wheel starts with blessing. And I dare say 99% of us that were raised Christian, whether you're practicing or not, we have some concept of original sin, but we don't have a concept of the original blessing. You got to understand, when original sin came onto the scene, it was a late addition. Jesus never had it. Even Jewish people have nothing of that in the scripture. They got a lot of other crazy stuff, but they don't have that, which might be the craziest thing of all. To be is be a blessing. Saint Irenaeus, who was a second century bishop, interestingly enough, he was a bishop in the city Rumi came to, 11th century Iconium, and he had this statement, which Eckhart built on. He was one of the earliest theologians, and he said, God became human so that humans could become divine. He was the first one to mouth that, and that is sort of startling. Okay, God became human, incarnated, so that humans could become divine. That's the scope of it. That's like what the possibility is. Now, a couple centuries later, he had Saint Augustine, who who did quite a bit of whoring around, and his mother pulled her hair out, And then he had this kind of Paul kind of experience where, he realized all that, and he flipped to the other side. And actually, he came up with the concept of original sin. This is in the 4th century. Also, conveniently, when the empire took over the religion. And so now, if everybody's born with sin, and you got a church that forgives sin, you got the perfect Walmart situation. They got to come to you, have your skin of sin forgiven. None of that before that. So we're born. And I don't have time to go back into the Garden of Eden, but if you could see, it's been totally misunderstood to support that. You can almost support anything from the Bible, but no, it came in through Augustine, and has lasted to this day. We think that I've got this picture of Jesus on the cross behind me, and we think that is he was paying for all of our sins and original sin and whatever. Well, that was a workaround. That's not it at all. You'll understand Jesus on the cross next week when we talk about going into the darkness. He never said he was a redeemer. He said he was the way. He was going to show you how to go through everything. And the hardest thing to go through is the darkness, the pain, the loss. So I think it has another meaning when you don't factor in original sin and you're factoring in original blessing, say. And again, Eckhart believes in sin. Here's his definition of sin when you make two. My Korean Zen master kept telling me, don't make two. And I said, what do you mean? He said, you're doing it again. Two is subject-object, is us and them, is me and everything else. And that's really what Eckhart, in his sermons, he talked about it. He said, when you make two, you're you're setting up an object to my subject. You're breaking the wholeness, and that it doesn't matter what it is: theft, rape, war. There's always somebody's made an object there. See, and so that was his idea, and nothing else. And it wasn't original. It just creeps in, and we can talk about it more next time. So the proper response to this blessing of creation is to savor it, is to delight in it, is to enjoy in it. I think of my walks on the road, which I didn't take today. It was -1, when I got up. But, there is even something to savor on these really cold days, but I wasn't up for it this morning. I was trying to prepare this talk. But savor it. All out of all the original sin thing came the idea that pleasure is a bad thing. It was not in the original teaching of Jesus, and it's corruption. When things are great, savor it. That's great. That's great. That's a spiritual practice, to be able to enjoy. They say Juliana Norwich made up the word enjoy. She was the first one to put "n" with joy and say you can enjoy, making it a verb. Yeah, yeah. So that's why he didn't have any time for grim, as the ascetic life. No. Now the contemplative modes, to just go back into the practices of enjoyment, is one to enjoy reality. When great things happen, enjoy it fully. Yeah. Now the contemplative mode would be mindfulness. That's why Thich Nhat Hanh hangs in here, because he's a mindfulness teacher. Just being aware of what is. Okay. And art forms of this kind of situation, the haiku would be one. That's why the Japanese made up haiku, because they didn't have to be telling a tale or a moral. It was what is, just in 3 short lines saying what is. Ecstatic squirrels in the snow, at two below. Yeah, I looked out the window. I saw these squirrels just playing tag in the snow, and it was 2 below. And they were just ecstatic. They were just having a great time. Ecstatic squirrels playing in the snow at 2 below. Frozen tag. That's what it was. So that's that sort of thing. And there's poetry fits this kind of thing, the celebration of what is. Mary Oliver, you don't have to go look any further. That's every poem that came out of her came from creation. She is the patron poetic saint of this tradition, for sure. So if you don't have a lot of Mary Oliver, you get it. Even I always read one on a day I don't go out to walk. I read one this morning. Now, meditation, which we're sliding into right now, is different in this mode. There's many ways of doing meditation and many kind of things. In this mode, it's a kind of ritualized enjoyment of the presence that is within you. Yeah, so when Thich Nhat Hanh teaches about it, he says, enjoy your sitting. Well, he's coming from that point of view, he's stressing something that, next week when we talk about when you're in anguish and whatever, contemplation it works a little differently. But, it's a ritualized, and we can try that today. Just try to enjoy being in the silence, in the stillness, and as you go deeper into yourself, which is the whole idea of all meditation, you can encounter that God you can't see, but there is a presence there, and you just can be with it. So it's not you and God. That's why this is a mudra. When you put your hands together, the two become one. I sit in the Zen tradition, where you put your two hands together and you make like I can't show it on the screen but you made the two become one, which they always were and always will be. So now whatever we have, the 39 of us or the 40 of us become one. for a time in sitting. Yeah, but try to stress just having enough trust to just say, I can just sit here in the silence and enjoy whatever comes. Just try to bring yourself back to going down and inward rather than the surface of things. Okay, so I'm going to start the timer. We're going to switch into, went a little bit long there, but there's a lot in that.